Because he wants to have a meal too. Because that's why I'm.
I don't know like how close they would get with the actually getting that close.
They said by 2026, almost have one.
But isn't it too warm for them? Like,
Yeah, or maybe it was 20.
I don't know. If they get that, wouldn't they like? Where is it? Like, they're gonna be big splits. Like, dildos. Yeah. Like, I always heard dodos were like really good tasting, but they're stinks. It's like,
You know what's super tasty?
Hey Dave, are you doing the introduction?
No, Rich Morris. Based on like. This was funny.
And
What is that?
It's something.
Yeah.
Based on the experience I had each
You never see it, never see it. I know. And because those are our then that was
Okay, so everybody's good? Okay, all right. Popcorn, it's broken. Popcorn makers are broken.
Oh. So that would be a problem, but it's just. Yeah. In my office, I just yeah, you don't.
Oh, happening over. Where's your wrenches? You're on. You're on.
Probably screwdrivers and a soldering iron. Second of all, I don't have a single, where,
Come to class tomorrow. I have class in here.
all right, I need to talk to you and to Dave.
And I know it's different asking.
All right. Hey, Dave, can we powwow for a second? All right. Okay, so here's the deal. So,
Not this Dave, the other Dave.
oh, he doesn't think he is. You better go talk to him. You're not, don't worry, you're free.
Which Dave is the power man to go to?
I have no idea. It's not me.
That one on. You know how to turn it on. All right, you're good.
Oh, that makes sense.
So is this a problem if my sweater covers the antenna?
You made it. You made the live stream.
You put it on.
Well, we know what happens when you try and turn on a computer. See that?
Yeah. Yeah.
I need to know that Dave doing I need to get my, yep, a clicker. And a clicker. And I need to get my intro for the bell. So you're gonna get a little history lesson. You just pass the little bells.
I'll show you what I'm talking about.
Here's the deal, everybody. So we're both performing for the people who are in this room, but also for a live stream.
Right, yeah.
For the live stream, we need to talk into this thing, and it needs to be passed from whoever is speaking to the next person. So whoever's going first, which is you,
Okay, yep.
you're going to throw this in your pocket,
Uh-huh.
this to your lapel.
Yep.
I'm gonna put it on. Put it in your pocket. Put it to your lapel.
So I'm gonna take off this jacket.
Nope, this is fine.
I'm
Oh,
not
you're
gonna wear.
gonna- oh,
Yeah.
okay.
It's just-
There we go. And then you're gonna pass it on to you. You're gonna take this, take that, put it in your pocket, put it on your lapel, then you're gonna pass it to him. And you're
But Doug
talking-
has the thing.
Nope.
Oh. Okay.
So then, when you're talking to the crowd, you're gonna use this one. Unfortunately, it's on a long wire. So you're gonna need to, you can take it up to the stage.
Yeah.
But, you know, so you,
Okay.
then you, and then it's gonna go in here. Okay?
Okay.
All right. So,
Need the USB.
oh, you want a USB thing?
Yeah.
You're gonna move your presentation onto here?
I'm gonna move my intro, yeah, onto here. Are you gonna be doing like the sharing the screen and everything? Okay. So you're running the. Yeah, I didn't. What help? I want to sit. Okay. I'm gonna go, yeah. Are you able to?
Actually met you in person. I'm Connie Malone. I'm the one.
Connie, yes, the one who's so organized.
So I just wanted to thank you for accommodating my enthusiasm and.
You're on top of it.
As well,
I apologize for not being as much on top of things.
but thank you so much.
Oh, yeah,
Meant
no,
a
no,
lot
no.
that You all could allow us to do this. and
Yeah,
Back on the.
absolutely.
Thank you.
Thank you. Is anybody sitting here? Okay. Is anybody sitting there? I'll sit here, give you a little elbow room there, Dick. Okay. All right. Huh?
Announcer for you.
I'm the history lesson. I'm taking over Mike's job of the Belk intro. So good Lord. A lot of people here. This is good. I'm impressed by how many people came.
It's the biggest group I've ever seen.
Yeah, yeah. And it's not all my students just trying to get extra credit.
I'm not seeing extra credit.
There's some of my students in here.
Are there?
Yeah, I see a lot of grad students, but I'm like that's one of my students over there. 2, 3, at least there's at least 3 of them. Actually, I take it back. Not many of my students. Oh, there's another. Oh, there's 3, 4, 5. Oh, yep. Yep. There's like 10 of them here.
We don't have to.
Oh, I see. Yes.
Oh, she's an invert too?
Triple. All right. How are you doing, Carly?
Thank you.
Did you hear how I heard how Olive got the best witness? Yes. I'll wait. You just tell me. Testing. Ooh. Okay. Are we good, Carla? All right. Well, first of all, I have to admit, this is one of the biggest audiences we've ever had at one of our Belk lectures. I appreciate you all for coming out tonight. I also invite you to stay afterwards for a reception in the behind the 2 double doors there. And you can talk to Doug or other people that you would like to talk to. So first of all, I'm going to give a little, before I give I'm going to give a little shout out, but then I'm going to give a little history lesson as to the history of the Belk Lecture and Ethel Belk. And then my esteemed colleague, Dr. Korchov, is going to introduce Doug. So tonight we're here to listen to Dr. Doug Tallamy, who is going to be giving his talk on the nature of oaks. It's important to recognize the Western program for co-sponsoring this talk. They are always so kind to help provide a little bit of financial assistance, but also to the use of the historic Leonard Theater, which is historically with the lights broken. So unfortunately, the overhead lights are going to remain on during the talk, but we think that because the screen is recessed, it's going to be nice. You shouldn't have a problem, Doug, with people seeing it. Also, I want to put a shout out to Project Dragonfly for live streaming this. And so this is going to be live streamed on the Hefner Museum of Natural History YouTube channel. Thank you guys. Thank you, Carla. And I also want to put another shout out to the Oxford Lane Library, because honestly, this is one of the main reasons that Doug is here with us tonight, because they reached out to us and said they were inviting Doug. And then they said, and they asked us if we wanted to do a co-host another event. And so really, they're the ones who spearheaded this. And he'll be giving a presentation tomorrow night at the Oxford Lane Library, same time, 7 o'clock, on a guide to restoring the little things that run the world. Okay. All right. Let's see if I can. Is this thing even plugged in? Carla. Is it on? It's not on. There you go. I got it. I think I have it. Next slide, please. It is on. I think it's on. Oh, I turned it off. Sorry. Oh, yeah, there you go. All right. I got it. It's like teaching, you know. Happens every day in class. All right. So who was Ethel Belk? This was Ethel Belk, a very stern looking and serious looking woman who actually contributed a lot to the teaching of botany here at Miami University. So she taught botany here for over 30 years, starting in 1929 to 1968. She was born in Henry, South Dakota, and she lived until 1990. And she lived here in Oxford. And she got her MS at South Dakota State University, studying the origin of adventitious roots and coleus. These are roots that grow from the stem. And then for her dissertation, she was an agristologist. So she studied grasses. So her dissertation was on a study of the anatomy and morphology of the flowers and spikelets in the grass family. Here is a image of her teaching in a classroom. This was apparently back then, students dressed really well. And I have to say they dressed better than I dress today. So things were much more serious back then. But she had a huge impact on the study of botany at Miami University. Here's a picture of the botany and bacteriology department in 1930, before we split off into botany and microbiology. And this is Ethel Belk sitting here. This was the chair of the department, Dr. Stark. And so, you know, she is known for giving personal attention and encouragement to her students. She wrote a lot of the manuals for introductory botany courses, and it says she bore a heavy teaching load in it. And basically, she taught essentially every botany class that was taught at the time. And so as we know, that's a huge feat. And so students spent more time with her than any other professor. And then she has some other jobs, like during World War II, she taught radio to naval students. Yeah. She helped build up the herbarium. This is our beloved herbarium that is still in Upham today. And she trained generations of botanists. And so as a result of her impact on botany at Miami University, she is honored by a resolution passed by the Ohio Senate in 1986 for outstanding contributions to botany. And this is the only person I know that's ever been recognized that way. You want to correct me, Hardy. And today we have, one of the things we have that honors her today still is the Belk Greenhouse, which is adjacent to Peabody Hall. And so you can actually view that, probably park right next to it. So she still has a legacy here at the university. So without further ado, I'm going to hand the mic over, or the mics over, to David Gorchov, who's going to introduce Doug. So here is this one. Let's do this one first.
Well, that I don't need. All right, can you folks hear me? All right, so it's my pleasure to introduce Doug Tallamy. A reminder, he is talking tomorrow at the Lane Library, and he'll be signing books there, both before and after his talk. So I think at 6:30, the book signing starts. So Dr. Tallamy did his master's, yes, at 6, maybe at 6 o'clock. And actually, the library would like you to register. So if you go to their website and tell them you're coming, they like that. Dr. Tallamy did his master's at Rutgers and his PhD at University of Maryland. He is a professor of entomology at University of Delaware. And he studies native insects, their importance to native birds, and the role of native and non-native plants as food or not food to the native insects. He's written several books, and just to give you a few titles: Bringing Nature Home, How Native Plants Sustain Wildlife in Our Gardens; The Living Landscape, Designing for Beauty and Biodiversity in the Home Garden; Nature's Best Hope, A New Approach to Conservation That Starts in Your Yard; and most recently, The Nature of Oaks, The Rich Ecology of Our Most Essential Native Trees. Hint, hint, that'll be the topic of today's Belk Lecture. So please join me in welcoming Douglas Tallamy. Okay, that should be good.
All right, I think we're good.
We're good. We're good.
Test 1, 2.
Test 1, 2. Smooth transition. I'm going to stand up here. Well, thank you, Dave, for that introduction. Wait till everybody gets seated. Why is an entomologist doing the Belk Lecture?
Right.
Because I am going to talk about trees. I'm going to talk about the nature of oaks. We're going to talk a little bit about oaks, but mostly about the nature that is associated with oaks, the many things that depend on them. And before we do that, let's do a little review. You all know that insects are the little things that run the world. We'll talk about that tomorrow. But E.O. Wilson told us way back in 1987 that life as we know it depends on insects. Without them, we'd lose 90% of our flowering plants. We would lose our terrestrial food webs. They're an essential component of the terrestrial food webs, which means we'd lose all the animals that depend on those food webs. We'd lose our decomposers, so the earth would rot because we'd only have bacteria and fungi. We'd lose humans too, very important. So we have a problem because we are losing our insects. As of 2014, 45% of the insects on the planet had already disappeared. That figure keeps going up and up. Why? Well, lights kill insects, neonicotinoids kill insects, but I just learned today we're going to solve that. What, tomorrow, didn't we say? Yeah. Deforestation kills insects, cars kill insects, climate change kills insects. When you take that and you make it that, it kills insects. What does that have to do with oaks? Well, there's no better way to share our spaces with insects than to plant an oak. And that's what we're going to talk about. That's why I wrote The Nature of Oaks, to try to convince people that oaks are really important plants. What I'm going to do is follow what has happened at our house where my wife and I lived. This is what it looked like when we moved in the year 2000. It was a 10-acre lot of a farm that was broken up into 10-acre lots. And the last thing I did was mow it for hay. So our job was to restore the ecosystem on this property, which we had never done before, and we didn't know what we were doing. But one of the things I did was go down the street. There was a white oak that dropped its acorns that year, and I picked them up and I just planted them everywhere. So we're gonna follow what's happening on one of those white oaks. Of course, white oaks germinate in the fall. They put out their little radicle, and that's pretty much all they do. It goes down into the dirt, and it looks like they're not doing anything, and they spend the winter that way. And then in the spring, they put up their first pair of leaves, and that's pretty much all they do then. It gives people the idea that oaks grow really slowly, but in fact, they're growing quickly. It's just that most of the growth is underground. In their first year, they're putting on 10 times more biomass than above ground biomass. So what they're doing is establishing a root system that will support their healthy life the rest of their life. So that's the oak that we're going to follow. It's in its second year there. There's a cage around it, because if I don't put a cage around my plants at my house, I don't have them because of those deer. And that's what it looked like 18 years later. 45 feet tall, 47-inch circumference, a canopy spread of 30 feet. It's still a baby, but it's a real landscape plant. So we're going to follow what happens on that tree. Now, one of the points I want to make is that oaks are a lifeline to an awful lot of species that are out there. There are dozens of species of birds that depend on oaks, both the acorns they produce and the insects that they support. Several mammals depend on oaks as well, rodents and big guys, bears, raccoons, possums, not that many reptiles. Maybe some rat snakes and fence lizards will be in the nooks and crannies. But there are several species of butterflies that depend on oaks, hundreds of species of moths that depend on them, as well as their predators and their parasitoids. So the number of species is building up here. Cynnipid gall wasps, actually more than 1,000 species of cynnipid gall wasps depend on oaks. Beetles, June beetles, longhorn beetles, metallic wood-boring beetles, weevils are all eating oaks. Then we have a lot of things happening or living on the leaf litter that is underneath the oaks. Lots of spiders, dozens more species of arthropods and mollusks, annelids are depending on that leaf litter. So it is refusing to change. Let me just see. Yeah, okay. All right, good. All right. So what we're talking about is a very complex community of life that's associated with oaks, but it's unnoticed. And if it's unnoticed, it's unappreciated by most people, which is why I wrote The Nature of Oaks. It is a month-by-month guide to the life that is happening on your oaks. You can go out every month of the year and say, this is what I ought to be finding on my oak, and see if that actually happens. The point was, I learned a long time ago that knowledge generates interest. Most of the time, interest often generates compassion, and compassion often generates action. We need a lot more compassion for nature and a lot more action to help save it. Before we start, a few facts about oaks. They're in the genus Quercus, which in North America is the large genus for trees. 91 species in North America, 435 species globally. There are 200 species of oaks in Mexico alone. The word Quercus comes from the Celtic quer, meaning fine, and ques, meaning tree, and they are fine trees. A little bit of taxonomy here, because you hear these names tossed about. There are 4 taxonomic sections in the genus that are common in North America. There's the white oak group, the Quercus group. The red oak group is Lobate. The live oak group, Verentes, and a smaller protobalanus canyon oak group in the west. Now, this is the distribution of oaks in North America. There is at least one species of oak that occurs every place except the brown areas. So in the northern Rockies and the driest parts of the plains, you don't have any oaks, but every other place you do. Center of distribution in North America is the southeast. Where are we now? We're right here. We're pretty close to oak hotbed. They live a lot longer than we give them credit for. Now, these data come from Europe, where they claim that oaks live on average 900 years if we allow them to do that. 300 years of growth, 300 years of stasis, and 300 years of decline. And during each one of those life history stages, they're delivering very important ecosystem services to the land around them. We'll talk a little bit about why they don't typically live that long, and it's the way we treat them. What is the longest lived oak in the country? People argue about it, but it could be the coastal live oak, the Penchenga oak. In California, it's estimated to be 2,000 years old. But if you really want the oldest oaks, you have to go to small little scrub-like things in the species called the Palmer oak, where they root and then they kind of die back and grow along a little bit more, root again, and then they die back. That specimen is estimated to be 13,000 years old. So oaks are some of the oldest living things on the planet. They can be big. They can be big. This actually scares people. I can't put an oak in my yard because it's going to look like that, and I won't have a yard anymore. But there are species of dwarf oaks, and we'll mention those as well. So you can actually, even if you have a small yard, you can use an oak. So some of them, they're large and majestic. This is the early oak in Wilmington, North Carolina. And you find them pretty much all over the country. And then finally, we're gonna focus on their superior ecological function. They have the highest biodiversity value, meaning they are supporting more species than other types of trees. Because of their large size, they're sequestering more carbon. They're also very dense in their growth, so they're heavy trees, and it's made of carbon. They're the best soil stabilizers because of their very large root system. They make the best leaf litter, meaning it lasts the longest, so it gets to perform as leaf litter longer than other types, and all of that promotes healthier watersheds. So I started the book in October, and people say, why'd you start in October? Because October is when my wife Cindy said, you should write a book about oaks. And I looked out the window, and there it was. So we started. Of course, October is when you're going to really notice that production of acorns. Acorns are very important feature of oaks, and they can make a lot of acorns. A single oak can make up to 3 million acorns in its lifetime, and each one of these is a very rich package of food for lots of animals. Very rich in fats, very rich in protein. There are 180 species of birds and mammals that use acorns. Lots of rodents depend on acorns, but so do the big guys. Those black bears are gathering up as much acorns in the fall to put on as much fat in the fall to get them through the winter. But other mammals eat acorns as well, raccoons, and certainly our friends, the squirrels, our deer. We love them dearly. They eat a lot of acorns. Birds eat acorns. Turkeys are just like black bears. They scour the forest floor, eating as many acorns as they can to put on fat to help them get through the winter. Red-bellied woodpeckers, red-headed woodpeckers, titmice, towhees, flickers, ducks. Lots of ducks eat acorns, particularly the wood duck. A viable acorn will fall into the water and sink to the bottom. Well, the ducks swim down and they get them from the bottom. And they'll also come up on the shore and eat all the acorns that are just laying there. Sandhill cranes doing the same thing in the fall. When you have particularly an oak mass, they're eating as many acorns as they can. And then we have a lot of invertebrates that are associated with oaks. This is the acorn weevil larva leaving an acorn, and that's what the adult looks like. They can be really numerous in oaks. You can have 80, 90% of the acorns having at least one acorn weevil larva in them. This is the acorn moth complex. There's actually several species. They all look exactly like that. You need DNA to separate them. But the caterpillar develops inside acorns and then tunnels out to pupate. So you have all these things eating acorns. And if you go and look under an oak tree, maybe a week and a half, 2 weeks after they drop the acorns, it's utter destruction. There's nothing left. And you might wonder how oaks ever successfully reproduce. And this is where a fascinating relationship between jays and oaks comes into play. The jay lineage and the oak lineage evolved in what is now the Arctic about 56 million years ago. And right away, they got to know each other and like each other. Jays like oaks because, of course, they produce that acorn, which is a wonderful source of food, particularly for the jay in the wintertime. What do jays do for the oaks? They give them mobility. They allow them to move farther and faster than any other tree species in the world. How does that happen? Well, this is how it happens. Jays are storing those acorns for winter use, and they don't cache them. They're not putting a whole lot of acorns in one place. They're burying them singly, even though they can carry more than one at a time. So what they do is they pick up an acorn, then they'll fly up to a mile. Some people say 1.5 miles from the parent tree, and then they tap it below the surface of the soil, typically where it's been disturbed. So they pick up an acorn. Now, if they think another jay has watched them bury their acorn, they'll wait a few minutes, then they'll dig it up and they move it. Because jays know that jays steal oaks. No, acorns, they steal acorns. Then, of course, in the wintertime, they're going to go back and find those acorns. They're very busy in the fall. A single jay can bury 4,500 acorns. The trick is they only remember where 1 out of every 4 is. So a single jay can actually plant 3,360 oak trees. And if they do it 1 mile from the parent tree, that is what allows those trees to move farther and faster. And when I say move, picture when the glaciers came down, it pushed all the plants right down to the Gulf states or into Central America. And when they receded, plants moved back north again. Well, oaks led the way through that relationship with jays. Jays also know how to plant them. An acorn that is planted by a jay has a much higher germination rate than acorns planted by humans. It's not just blue jays that have this relationship. All the species of jays do. The scrub jays in the west, Steller's jay. It was funny. I was in Portland, Oregon, and the bird people there said, Steller's jays don't touch acorns. I said, okay, I'll take a picture anyway. Mexican jays, all the jays do. Pinyon jays, they all depend on oaks, even the green jay. And as you move into Central America, that relationship continues. Another bird that depends on acorns is the acorn woodpecker. And it has a specialized relationship pretty similar to what the jays are doing. But rather than burying the acorns underground, they stick them in holes in what we call an acorn tree. They find an old snag and they drill holes in it, and then they store the acorn in the hole for the wintertime. This is in the west, particularly the southwest, and it's dry there, as you know. So these trees last a long time. There you go, winter storage. Now, an acorn tree is a really valuable resource for a family of acorn woodpeckers. So they work together as a family unit and they guard it from other acorn woodpeckers. So if you have an acorn tree in your yard, it's a really, it's a fascinating thing to watch. Okay, November is when you might look back and say, there were a lot of acorns this year, or there weren't very many at all. When there's a lot, we call it a mast year. And when there's not very many at all, we don't call it anything. But mast years are unusual. So you have asynchronous reproduction in oaks, a few other trees as well, but particularly oaks. They're making a whole lot of acorns. Then they'll go 1, 2, 3, sometimes 4 years with making very few or no acorns. Unusual. So of course, ecologists want to explain it. And these are the top 4 hypotheses, and they're not mutually exclusive. They all could be operating at the same time. Predator satiation, predator reduction, improved pollination, and energy partitioning. Let's talk briefly about each one. Predator reduction. Let's say you have a mast year and make a lot of acorns. The squirrels eat the acorns, the mice eat the acorn weevils eat the acorns, and their populations explode. So you have a whole lot of squirrels and all of those things that eat acorns. Then the next year, you make very few acorns, and there's not enough food for any of those huge populations. So they actually crash. Predator reduction. Predator satiation. This is an acorn weevil outside of an acorn. When the predator populations crash, then there's very few acorn eaters. Then you have another mast year. Then you have more acorns than the acorn eaters can eat. And you're satiating the predator population. And that's how the oaks get some of those acorns through so that they can germinate. Improved pollination. Oaks are wind pollinated. These are the male catkins hanging down. They release their pollen on the wind. And then once it's on the wind, it's a game of chance. That is a female flower right there. So they're very small, inconspicuous flowers. And the pollen has to fall on a female flower. Now, the female flowers on a single plant are not synchronized with pollen release. So an oak typically cannot pollinate itself. It requires pollen from another tree. So if you actually want acorns in your yard, you need more than one tree of the same species within pollen blowing distance for that to happen. Energy allocation. By the way, if you're wondering whether oaks can have good fall color, they can, particularly the scarlet oak. That's a scarlet oak in my yard. Well, energy allocation, there's never enough energy to go around. So oaks tend to allocate it towards growth or towards reproduction, but rarely do they do both at the same time. And again, these 4 hypotheses are not mutually exclusive. They all can be operating to favor oak masting. December, this is when oaks exhibit another unusual behavior in trees, particularly members of the white oak group. And that is that they don't drop their leaves in the fall. It's a deciduous tree that hangs on to its leaves. That condition is called marcescence, a tough word to spell. But again, it's an unusual behavior exhibited by trees, so we want to explain it. And the leading hypothesis here is that not long ago, there were a lot of huge Pleistocene mammals. And by not long ago, I'm talking about 8,000 to 9,000 years ago. And you can go to where was I? Cincinnati Airport? No, in Lexington, wherever I was today. And there's big skeletons there of those big Pleistocene mammals. So this is the group of mammals that were in Mexico alone. 3 species of mammoths. The giant sloth could reach up 18 feet. There were, huge bison. I think 44 species of rhinoceros worldwide. There were a lot of mammals around back then, and many of them were browsers. So they're not eating grass on the ground. They're eating, particularly in wintertime, they're eating woody material, particularly the buds of trees, because that's where the protein is, the buds that will leaf out in the spring. So if oaks surround those buds with dead leaves that don't taste very good, it makes it an unappetizing mouthful. And if you look at the distribution of marcescent leaves, they go up about 18 feet, and then they stop. The top branches are not marcescent. So that supports that hypothesis. It's a very difficult hypothesis to test right now, but it does make a nice story. It also gives oaks a landscape trait that is useful in landscaping, and that is it can be a screen even in the wintertime. So if you don't like your neighbor, you can plant a white oak or any members of the white oak group and screen them out in the summer and the wintertime. Very convenient. Okay, January is when it's cold. We're not out looking up in our oaks, but if we do, we often see little birds flitting around up in the oaks. Now, birds don't go out and play. Energy is really important. They've got to do things that provide return. And you say, well, they're probably up there getting insects, but look, it's wintertime. There's no insects up there. Now, a lot of the birds that are flitting around are things like chickadees, things like titmice, and they go to our feeders. Maybe they are playing up there, but they get their food from seed. But if you actually look into chickadee diets and titmice diets, only about 50% of their winter food is seeds. The other 50% is insects and spiders. And then you got things like the golden crown kinglet, which are flitting around in the oaks, and they don't eat seeds at all. They're 100% insectivores. They should have migrated, and it creates what we call the kinglet paradox. You've got an insectivore that stays up where there aren't any insects. How does that happen? Well, Bernheinrich doesn't like paradoxes, so he actually looked in the crops of golden crown kinglets in Maine in the wintertime, in January, I think it was, and he found they were full of caterpillars. There are caterpillars up in the oak trees, and we don't know they're there because they look just like sticks, and they're just sitting there still all winter long. When it drops below freezing, they shrink a little bit. They've got proteins in their cells that prevent them from freezing, and then when it warms up, they swell up a little bit. But they really are just sitting there, not doing anything. So we don't have a kinglet paradox anymore. We know why they're here. There's actually good food for them in the oak trees. But we do want to explain why we've got nearly mature caterpillars spending the winter in our trees. And again, we don't know. My guess is that, of course, in the spring, you've got a flush of new leaves. If you overwinter as a large larva, you can outcompete anything else. The other alternative is to overwinter as an egg. Eggs have to hatch out. They're tiny little guys. Or you can overwinter as an adult. And if you know, there's some insects that do that. Then you have to find a mate. You have to mate, and then you got to lay an egg, and that egg has to hatch. So you're really behind the 8 ball. If you overwinter as a pupa or a chrysalis, you've got to emerge in as an adult and find an egg, you know. So the larva has a head start on everything else that's out there, and essentially unlimited food if you can make it through the winter without being eaten by a kinglet. Okay, February. This is the quietest time of year for oaks, and it's when I typically talk about oak landscaping myths. But Rich said make this a 45-minute talk, so we're not going to talk about this very much. Are oaks too expensive? Do they grow too slowly to use as landscape plants? Are they too big to use in small lots? Are they going to crush our house if we do plant them? Will they lift up our sidewalk? Are they too expensive? Not if you plant them small. Are they going to grow too slowly? No. Are they too big to use on small lots? We've got a lot of dwarf oak species that you can use, particularly around here. Quercus prinoides, dwarf chestnut oak is a good option, and then it won't. Will they crush your house? Not if you plant them as an oak grove. When you plant a single specimen tree and it has nothing to interlock its roots with, whether it's an oak or not, a lot of them blow over. So we need to plant our trees closer together so they can interlock their roots and form a very stable matrix. Are they going to lift up our sidewalks? If you plant them over bedrock, yes, they will. If you plant them over agricultural pan, yes, they will. But if you have good deep soil, you break up that pan, they won't. There you go. March, this is when the leaves finally start dropping. So we can talk about oak leaf litter. And one of the things we want to know is why we need leaves. But first, let's talk about the diversity of oak leaves. A lot of people think all oaks have lobes in their leaves. It is a typical morphology, but many of them don't. That's a live oak leaf right there, a willow oak, water oak. That oak leaf that's emery oak. It looks like a holly leaf. This is shingle oak. So there are species out there that have no lobes at all. And oaks make a lot of leaves. A single tree, mature tree, can make 700,000 leaves, which if you line them up next to each other, it will cover 4 tennis courts. So why do we need leaves? They're doing several things. They're providing, one of their major functions is to protect the soil moisture that our entire community of soil organisms depends on. They form a blanket over the forest floor. And even when you go through periods of dryness, if you have a good spread of oak leaves, you're maintaining the moisture that everything depends on. There are more species that live under the ground than above the ground. And again, they all need high humidity. A single square meter of oak leaf litter has 250,000 mites, 100,000 springtails. That's a little spinthurid columbulan springtail. 90,000 proturans. Those are very, very primitive insect-like creatures. 1 million nematodes. Most of these guys are detritivores. They are breaking down the oak leaf litter. And that brings up the second most important function, and that is to return the nutrients your tree used this past year to the soil so they can use them again. It's a closed nutrient cycle. When we rake our leaves away from the tree, and you do that every single year, you're starving your tree. The nutrients are not getting returned to the soil. There are things that we like to see, like red-banded hair-streaked butterflies, beautiful butterflies. Look, caterpillar eats that stuff, dead oak leaves on the ground, believe it or not. As a matter of fact, there are 70 species of moths we call litter moths. Where the caterpillars eat the dead leaves on the ground. This is the ambiguous litter moth, the American idea, the dark-spotted palthus, and 67 other species that I could but will not show you. And then, of course, you have all the predators that are eating all of those caterpillars and those other creatures, particularly carabid beetles, lots of species of carabid beetles down there. How about our fireflies, our lightning bugs, whatever you want to call them? They're actually beetles. This is an adult firefly, and there's the lantern that it talks to its mate with. But that's what a larval firefly looks like. They are predators in leaf litter. When you rake all your leaf litter away, that is why you don't have fireflies anymore. Okay, April. This is when those buds are breaking, and it's a chance for you to see one of the most ephemeral interactions between animals and plants in the whole world. It takes about 5 minutes, and it happens once a year. Happens a lot in that 5 minutes, but you have to be watching the right time. And I'm talking about when gall wasps, synipid gall wasps, lay their eggs in the buds of oaks. That's a synipid gall wasp, one of the bigger ones. So that's what's happening here. This is a female synipid. That little structure right there is her ovipositor, and she's injecting an egg into the meristematic tissue of this oak bud. That is a gall wasp male that is riding her. He's already mated with her, but he stays on her back because he doesn't want anybody else to mate with her before she lays that egg and uses his sperm to fertilize the egg. This male wishes he was that male. So she's laying her eggs in here, and not only is she injecting an egg into that bud, but she's also injecting plant hormones that will control take over the stem cells that are in those buds and direct their growth. A lot of people say that galls, and it forms a gall, and people say that galls are like cancerous growths on a plant. I don't like that analogy because cancerous growths are uncontrolled growth. This is highly controlled gall growth. It is so controlled that you can recognize the species of galler by the shape of the gall. But that gall is not just a function of the hormone she injects into the tree, because the tree also has hormones. So it's a compromise between those two sets of hormones. There are more than 1,000 species of synipid gallers on oaks globally. A single tree can support up to 70 species of gallers. As a matter of fact, if you have an oak tree that has no gallers on it, there's something wrong. It's one of the interactions that ought to be happening on your tree. Now, many galls are hollow. This is the apple oak gall or the oak apple gall. I've seen it written both ways. And if you cut it open, the galler is actually in a cylindrical sphere there, right in the middle. You got a lot of air. It's essentially hollow, and then the outside of the gall. What is that all about? Well, it turns out that synipid gall wasps are attacked by more species of parasitoids, other wasps, than any other type of insect. So in other words, they're clobbered by natural enemies. This is a pterimid wasp, and it's a female. She's got an ovipositor there. And many of them have very long ovipositors. So that space between where the galler is in the center of the gall and the outside of the gall has to be bigger than the length of this ovipositor. Otherwise, she can reach it and lay an egg in it. And when the gall is small, she can reach it. But those galls grow really quickly. They expand very quickly to get the galler to a safe so that the parasitoids cannot reach it. This is a pterimid in the west, has the longest ovipositor, and it creates the largest gall. This is on Quercus garryana, the Oregon oak. And that ovipositor is so long because it's got to reach the center of that gall so she can lay an egg on it. There's a lot of variation in gallers and in terms of the shape of the gall. As a matter of fact, it is fantastic. There's a lot of spherical galls that grow on the leaf, or spherical galls that grow on the stems. There are galls that look like that. A lot of galls look like plant diseases. We mistake them for plant diseases. That's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Each one of those is a separate gall. This one looks like pottery in my yard. I call that the brain gall, the buttocks gall. I am making these up, but the spindle gall, the cotton candy gall, the bowling pin gall. In California, there are a lot of very pretty candy-like galls. There's a guy named Tim Boomer who loves to take pictures of them. So there's that one. There's that one. Then the gnome house gall, that's the cutest one. That, of course, is where the galler has left. It's not really a door. So you can spend your time searching for different galls. Okay, May, this is when that new biological season really bursts forth in earnest, because all the leaves are expanding. And following the expansion of those leaves comes the caterpillars that eat those leaves. And following the caterpillars that eat those leaves come the birds that eat those caterpillars. It's spring migration, and it's not a coincidence that our birds are moving up from the south just when there's a whole flush of caterpillars in North America. Now, birders know that if you want to find warblers, you go to oaks because that's where the bird food is. What is the bird food I'm talking about? I'm talking about caterpillars. You know, in the spring, there are no seeds, there are no berries. The plants haven't made them yet. The migrating birds are getting their energy from insects, mostly caterpillars. Things like the purple-crested slug, the buck moth, the white-marked tussock moth, the saddle prominent, the double-line prominent, the white-dotted prominent, the checkered fringe prominent, the laugher. the lace-cap caterpillar, the two-spotted oak punky, the skiff moth, the oblique heterocampa, no, the white, the senior moment caterpillar, the oblique caterpillar. I knew all these things this morning, but I'm gonna have them early. I have to say, I left for the airport. I left my computer at home. Not good. The variable oak leaf caterpillar, the banded tussock moth, the red line panapola, the yellow neck caterpillar, the smaller parasite, the unicorn caterpillar, the crown slug. They call them slug caterpillars because the head is tucked up underneath, not because they're really slugs. The streaked dagger moth, the epilated dagger moth, the hesitant dagger moth, the lesser oak dagger moth, the medium dagger moth, the greater oak dagger moth, the streaked dagger moth, the red humped oakworm, the pink striped oakworm, the confused wood grain, the spiny oak slug, the spun glass caterpillar. That's the cutest caterpillar in the world, I think. And hundreds of other species have come to the oaks on our property. Now, I have been taking pictures of every caterpillar that I could find at home on our property for the last 8 years as one of the measures of how life is doing on my property. And I'm up to 1,337 species of just moths. Butterflies, by the way, are bad-tasting day-flying moths. And because they taste bad, they can fly during the day, and they're not important parts of local food webs. So I'm just counting the moths. That's a lot of moth species, and 28% of them, almost 30%, depend on oaks. That makes oaks really powerful plants that I call keystone plants. Remember what a keystone is? It's a stone in the middle of the Roman arch, and if you take it out of the arch collapses. Well, that's the role of keystone plants. They maintain the food web in your space, and if you take it out of that food web, the food web will collapse. Oaks support more than 950 species of caterpillars nationwide. No other plant genus comes close to that. Now, you might wonder, who cares about caterpillars? A lot of people don't care about caterpillars, but they should, because they're such important components of those food webs. And because we have so many caterpillars, we've recorded 62 species of birds that have bred on our 10 acres. So not flew by, but bred. Why? Because we've got the caterpillars that they need to feed their young. How many caterpillars? A lot. 6,000 to 9,000 caterpillars to get one clutch of chickadees to the point where they leave the nest, where they fledge. And after they fledge, the parents continue to feed them caterpillars another 21 days. So if you add, and nobody can count that, so if you add them all up, it's probably, tens of thousands of caterpillars to get one clutch of a bird that's 1/3 of an ounce to the point of independence from their parents. And after they're independent, they keep eating caterpillars. One nest, one bird. What if you want a population of lots of species of birds in your yard? You need a lot of caterpillars. Who's going to make those caterpillars? It's going to be oaks. Other plants too, but oaks are going to lead the way. Dan Jansen calls them the meat and potatoes, the bread and butter of terrestrial food webs, because they are transferring more energy from plants to other animals than any other type of plant eater. So if we design landscapes that don't make a lot of caterpillars, we will eventually have failed food webs and eventually failed ecosystems. It makes them really important. June, this is cicada month. Did you guys have the cicadas a couple of years? Yeah. Okay. So you know what happened? What was interesting to me, of course, the periodical cicada, the 17-year and the 13-year cicada is predictable. We know when it's going to happen. The media knows when it's going to happen. And I don't know if you listened to your media, but my media, everything they said about the coming cicadas was really negative. It was going to be a terrible scourge. We should all fear it. They're going to be so loud, you're going to go crazy and kill your babies. They said that, seriously. An invasion, everything was very negative. Oh, you might consider moving so that you don't have to endure this terrible thing. I think it's one of the most fantastic biological events that you'll ever be privileged to witness. And I've seen several of them in my lifetime, starting the first one when I was 10. But it's going to be 17 years before I see it again, and I might not. So I really wanted to appreciate it this time. It was a big one. This is an oak tree right in my building, Townsend Hall at the University of Delaware. So it was a big one. And of course, once they come out of the ground as nymphs, they're leaving holes. That aerates the roots and allows moisture to get down to the roots. So you don't have to pay anybody to do that. They do it for free. As I said, it was a big one. It was so big that 11 Mississippi kites flew up from somewhere to eat the cicadas in Newark, Delaware, and they stayed there a week. That's the one I saw, but and then they went away. Who knows where they went? This is what happens. They come out at night. They hang upside down from a piece of vegetation. They split the back of their exuvies, swing up somehow without falling out, and hang there. And what they have to do is tan their exoskeleton. They're hardening it up. Right now, they're like a soft-shelled crab. Anything can eat them, but that's why they're doing it at night, so nothing knows that they're there. They hang there for a couple hours until they are completely hard, and then they can fly away and start their cicada life. And their cicada life, if you were a male, is to attract a female. And they do that by, they've got two membranes in their thorax that they can, it's not vibrating, it's like clicking it. So they're really tight. Picture a Coke can, we go click, 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 click. Well, they do that about 400 times a second, and it creates a buzz, and a very loud buzz, depending on the species. And as a matter of fact, loud is good, because the louder the male is, the greater the chance that a female will choose him. Well, this guy was lucky. A female did choose him, so they mated. Now it's her turn. She has to get her eggs into the stems of trees, and they really like oaks. So this is a female on a pin oak in my front yard. That's her ovipositor. She's jamming it into the tree, which in itself is tricky. Take a pin and try to stick it into the branch of a pin oak. You're going to bend the pin. She does it. She gets it in there. She lays an egg. Then she goes down, lays another egg and another egg and another egg, and maybe 7 or 8 in a row. And then she'll go to another branch and do it again until she runs out of eggs. From the point where she inserts her eggs, the branch often, not always, dies. So this picture here, that branch didn't die. I don't know why. That's called flagging. And people get upset about it. They said, they're going to kill my tree. They're not going to kill your tree, but they are going to prune it once every 17 years, and it probably needs it by then. The eggs hatch, the little guys fall to the ground. I used to say they parachute to the ground, but somebody said, what do they use for a parachute? They fall to the ground and they dig a hole into the soil, and they start sucking on plant roots, where they're going to make their way down and actually suck on the tree roots. A single oak tree can host 40,000 nymphs with no measurable effect on its growth rate. Why? Because these guys are sucking xylem. Xylem is essentially water. There's very little nutrients in it. And they do it for a long time. So they're not sucking very much at any one point. I had a student go through the city of Newark and look at flagging as a measure of which trees they preferred the most in terms of oviposition. The green bars are species of oaks. So they do oviposit on other trees, but they like oaks the best. And then they die. Takes about 3 weeks. You don't have to kill your babies. The interesting question is, why are they staying underground 13 years or 17 years? And it comes back to predator satiation. At least that's the leading hypothesis. A lot of things eat cicadas, but there is no predator that can wait 17 years to eat. So it's simply the population of what's there when they come out in huge numbers, and it is by the millions. So many of them make it. Okay, July, this is when the night chorus begins. And by night chorus, I mean it's when katydids start to sing. The katydids are males. That's a sclerotized portion of the first pair of wings. They raise them up and they scrape them back and forth, and they make their katydid sound. And if you're wondering why they're making a katydid sound, this is why. Once upon a time, there was a young woman named Katy who fell in love with a handsome young man. Alas, he did not share her feelings, and he married another. Soon thereafter, he and his young bride were found poisoned in their bed. Who perpetrated the crime was never determined, but some of them say the insects in the tree were watching that night, and each summer they solved the mystery by singing katydid, katydid. You're not hearing it, but it does go. Everybody's heard katydids, right? Yeah. It's a feature of summer camping. For me, it's a wonderful sound. I did a lot of summer camping when I was young. There are 4 species of katydids that frequent oak forests in the east, only one in the far west. This is a female. She's got a spatula-like ovipositor. She hasn't expanded her wings yet, but she takes that ovipositor and she glues these big, fat, flat eggs to sticks. Now, she typically does it up in the canopy, so we don't usually see this, but sometimes it's low enough and people wonder what it is. These guys have already hatched, but they are very large insect eggs. Why are they so loud? For the very same reason. Females prefer loud males. It is the female's fault. August, this is when oak leaves get really tough. It's a tough time for mandibulate insects that chew oak leaves. In the spring, of course, oak leaves are very flexible, very pliable, easy to eat. They're soft and tender, but by August, they're kind of like boards. They're full of tannins, they're full of lignins, and very tough to eat. So the couple of solutions the insects have come up with, and one of them is to feed gregariously. For some reason, a lot of mouths make it easier to eat that tough material. And when you look at caterpillars on oaks in August, many of them are gregarious. This is the yellow net caterpillar when it's young. That's what it looks like when it's older. They still stick together, and they can end up eating a lot of oak leaf material. But it's a common feature. This is the orange humped oakworm, the pink striped oakworm of caterpillars that eat oaks in August. They are gregarious. But because they eat a lot of material and somebody comes across this, we get upset, oh, they're going to kill my oak tree. This is the oak tree we're following. And in 2014, I walked around the base of this tree and I counted the number of caterpillars just on the branches that I could reach. So not very tall. And it turned out to be 410 caterpillars that were there. Including 115 of those big yellow net caterpillars eating the oak leaves. Then I stood back 5 minutes later and took that picture so that I can ask you, how many of those caterpillars do you see? How much caterpillar damage do you see? Nothing. And this is the distance at which we typically view our trees. But if I knocked on your door and said, you got 410 caterpillars on your oak tree, call the man, get the spray can, save the tree. You don't have to save the tree. Oaks are good at sharing their energy, which is why they're supporting so many other types of species. There's a woman in New Orleans, Tammany Baumgarten, who suggests we practice the 10-step program. Take 10 steps back from your trees and all your insect problems disappear. It's a much better solution than spraying everything and killing all that bird food. Another option is to get really, really small and become a leaf miner. Rather than eating the cuticle, the epidermis, lower and upper epidermis, that's where all that leaf toughness is. You would be like a coal miner and mine the palisade parenchymal cells that are soft and that's where the nutrients are by being a leaf miner. And that's what this creature has done. The egg was laid there. This is a caterpillar doing this. And it's called the serpentine mine because the mine looks like a snake. The dark line in the middle there is the poops of that caterpillar. He pushes them all to the middle. It's called frass. And right here is where the caterpillar pupated, and then it emerged. So out of the entire oak leaf, that's all that little caterpillar ate. That's called the serpentine mine. This is called a blotch mine. This guy, the caterpillar's right there. He just goes in a circle and makes a blotch. There he is backlit, so you can see the caterpillar, and there he is outside of the mine. Very nice picture by Salvador Batanza. Doesn't look much like a caterpillar. This guy's got so many specialized adaptations. Various oak leaf miner, the oak tentiform leaf miner. Oaks support a lot of leaf miners because it's a convenient way to get around all of that leaf toughness. Okay, September, this is the last month of the year that we will treat. It is the peak of cricket populations. You know, by the way, the big black crickets on the ground, Gryllus pennsylvanicus, if they get into your house, it's good luck if you don't kill them. If you do kill them, bad news. But there are tree and bush crickets, which are not black. They're yellowish, or some of them are almost white. Or tan, and they're up on vegetation, including oak leaves. And they're doing the same thing. This is a male. He's trying to attract a female. He knows he's got to be the loudest male because that's what she demands. But he's very smart about it. He finds a hole in the leaf, or he actually chews a hole of the right size in the leaf. He sticks his head through there, raises his wings, and he moves them back and forth and does his chirping. Now, most leaves have some type of a parabolic shape to them. So that projects the sound farther and louder than if he sang on a flat surface. So if you can believe it, this male is sending a female a false message. So he tricks her, she comes and mates with him. But she's not definitely the loser because he may not be the biggest, loudest male, but he could be the smartest male, and that could be good enough. September is also the time you're most likely to see walking sticks. They're called walking sticks because they look like sticks and they walk. This is one I found on an emery oak in Arizona. It was quite low, so I could take its picture. This is the one we have in the east. We don't have that many species of walking sticks, and we don't see them very often because they spend the entire summer up in the canopy. And the females are doing interesting things in the canopy. They're just walking along and dropping eggs to the forest floor. Some of those eggs will hatch the next year, or they'll hatch 2 years, and some even wait 3 years to hatch. It's called bet hedging, where they're not all hatching in the same year, just in case it's a terrible year for them. She's spreading her reproductive effort over time and space. But there's an interesting interaction between walking sticks, their eggs, and many of our spring ephemerals. This, of course, is bloodroot. They make pods, and in those pods are bloodroot seeds, and the pods dehisce, and those seeds, they're actually pretty little things, fall out. They've got these white structures on them called elaiosomes, and it turns out that elaiosomes are really tasty for ants. Ants love elaiosomes. So the ants will come, and they will pick up the seed, carry it back to the nest. Everybody eats the elaiosome. The seed itself is way too hard, so they throw it in the ant garbage dump, the ant nest garbage dump, which is about an inch below the surface of the soil, which is perfect for the germination of these spring ephemerals. So many of our spring ephemerals have elaiosomes in that interaction with ants. Well, it turns out that walking stick eggs have a white stripe, just like the elaiosome, and I'll bet, I don't know, but I'll bet there is chemical mimicry here where it smells like elaiosomes. And the ants come, pick it up, carry it back to the nest. They can't eat it, so they throw it in the garbage dump, and it's a perfect place for these guys to stay until they hatch. Okay, we have made it through the year, so we have to talk about some unhappy things like the biodiversity crisis. And it's a biodiversity crisis that we have created by not sharing our human-dominated spaces with the life around us. You hear about birds disappearing and this vanishing. They're not vanishing, they're not disappearing. We're killing them. We're killing our birds. We've lost 3 billion breeding birds. And by the way, unless you're a billionaire, you may not know that a billion is 1,000 million. We have lost 3,000 million birds in the last 50 years. We're killing our insects, global insect decline. We are killing the nature that supports us, which is why we're now in the 6th great extinction event that the planet has ever experienced. So it's a global crisis, but it does have a solution, and I think it's a grassroots solution. Rather than looking for leadership from the top, we're just going to create it from the bottom. There are 4 things, 4 ecological responsibilities that every landscape has. Every landscape. Every landscape has to sequester carbon. You know, plants are built out of carbon. They pull out of the atmosphere. Through photosynthesis, they build their tissues out of the carbon from carbon dioxide, and they pump the extra carbon into the ground through their root system for long-term storage. That helps climate change. Every landscape must be doing that. Every landscape must manage the watershed in which it lies. Every landscape must support a diverse community of pollinators, not to help agriculture, but because they pollinate 80% of all plants and 90% of all flowering plants, including a few of our agricultural plants. And every landscape has to support a complex food web. That's the ecological responsibility of every landscape. And when you plant an oak, you're planting a plant that is going to accomplish all 4 of those goals better than any other plant, or at least 3 of them better than any other plant. It's going to capture more carbon and hold it for long-term storage. It's going to manage the watershed really, really well. It's going to support the most complex food web of any other plant. It even supports pollinators, even though they're wind pollinated. If you watch your oak catkins in the spring, a lot of spring bees will go to those catkins. They don't pollinate the plant. They're not taking the pollen to the female flower, but they are gathering it up and using it for their own use. So oaks do turn out to be an important source of pollen for spring bees. Well, they've got a lot of great landscape attributes, but despite them, they are in trouble these days. You've heard of oak tatters caused by pre-emergent herbicides. It volatilizes when the weather's right. So that's what a white oak leaf should look like, and that's what it looks like. after the pre-emergent herbicides float over and touch it. Big problem in Iowa and some other places. But they've got lots of problems. The old giants are gone from our forests for the most part because we cut them down for agriculture or we needed wood. The percentage of oaks in our eastern forests has been cut in half in the last 100 years. We've introduced a number of serious oak diseases and pests. We've got bacterial leaf scorch. We've got sudden oak death syndrome. We've got oak wilt taking a heavy toll. And we've introduced, the spongy moth, used to be the gypsy moth, and some other things that are being very hard on our oak trees. Deer overabundance. Now if if an oak germinates, gets that big and the deer comes and eat it. There's almost no recruitment of young oaks in many of our forests where we have deer overabundance. You might wonder why it worked in my yard that first year I planted them all. I didn't have any deer. I didn't have any rodents. I didn't have anything. There was a barren landscape. If I did that today, it wouldn't last at all. Habitat fragmentation. We've spread our oaks apart so much that it's difficult for the pollen to actually reach from one individual to another. So germination or acorn production is reduced. 28 of our 91 North American oak species are now threatened, and 1/3 of global oaks are actually endangered because of habitat loss. The Oregon white oak that I mentioned has lost 97% of its range because it used to be where agriculture is. 2,300 species rely on oaks in Great Britain that are now threatened because of the loss of oaks in Great Britain. So we humans live our lives out in a very brief instant of ecological time, and we cannot return those giant oaks to our forests during that time period, but we can start the process. And in no time at all, our oaks will get big enough to start to perform many of the ecological goals that I just talked about. That's an oak I planted from an acorn. Today, it's about 60 feet tall, and we've only been on the property 24 years. So it doesn't take a long time to put these things back. Now, we all have a responsibility for good earth stewardship because we all require good earth stewardship. And the best way to exercise that responsibility is to embrace the power of oaks. Robert Swan recently said the greatest threat to our planet is believing that someone else will save it. Not going to be someone else, it's going to be us. It's going to be you and me. So for the sake of our turkeys, our chickadees, our woodpeckers, our warblers, our jays, our thrushes, our lightning bugs, our gallers, our weevils, our orthopterans, our moths, for us, for our own sake, plant an oak, plant a living community, plant the future. Thanks very much. I think we are doing questions, but because of the recordings, I'm going to repeat them after you ask me. But keep in mind, I don't get my hearing aid until April 16th. And I don't get my new tooth until the following month. Yes.
Gypsy moths, spongy moths, but they were gypsy moths back then. Native to New Jersey and were foliating oaks, and we were really worried. So tell us how the spongy moth problem has played out on the East Coast.
Depends on where the spongy moth problem, how's it played out on the East Coast? It has been around. It's been around since the late 1800s when it was introduced into Massachusetts. It is a cyclical problem. And it's a cyclical problem that is often triggered by several years of drought in a row, which is what's happened in New England recently. So Massachusetts and Connecticut, again, are getting hammered by the spongy moth. New Jersey, where it was defoliated, that's the pine barrens, those oaks are back. The oak tree and single oak tree that is not already sick or planted on very shallow soil can take 2 or 3 years of defoliation without dying. Now sometimes a stress tree, it will kill it, but you don't have to freak out with one year. There is a fungus that has made its way here from Europe. And we spent a lot of time and a lot of money working on biological control of gypsy moth. The only thing that really works is something that came in without our help at all. But it requires rain, rainy, cool, wet springs, and then this fungus will break out. When it's dry, it doesn't work. There's also a virus that is species specific. It only kills the spongy moth when it reaches really high densities. And the Forest Service spent a lot of time and money making a product called GypCheck, where you can spray GypCheck out. You're spraying the forest out, or the virus out on a gypsy moth population. It totally controls them. So we have a control that completely eliminates the problem, but the Forest Service will not make it because they say we are not in the business of making this. They want a private company to do it. It's not a big enough sell for a private company. So we've had this product for 20 years and nobody makes it. So the spongy moth is still around. It's still causing problems locally. Yes. Any tips for preventing our oaks from being killed prematurely? Leave the leaves. Allow oaks those nutrients to return to the soil so that the oaks can take them up again in a natural way. The root system of oaks can be quite large. Somebody in England was digging up, they wanted to see how far the root system of Quercus robur, the English oak, went from the main stem of a mature tree, and they dug, I think they got 300 feet from the trunk, and they gave up following the root system. So where do you plant an oak where it doesn't run into a sewer line or a street or a foundation or something? So we don't allow our oaks to spread their roots the way they typically should. It's funny, you go down the street and you see these street plantings of oaks, and that's a good choice, except they're in a little cement pot like that. Not going to live 900 years. Introducing these diseases has been a terrible thing for our oaks. And I hear foresters and I hear arborists saying, don't plant an oak anymore. It's just going to get sick and die. I say plant more oaks than ever because there is resistance in every single population. And what we need to do is weed out the susceptible trees. And many of the ones that are there now are susceptible. I've got bacterial leaf scorch on my property, and I've already lost 2 oaks, but I've got many that look fine. Those are the ones that are going to make the acorns. The jays will pick up an acorn and weigh it. So if it's weak or small or empty, they won't bother with it. They're the ones that are going to move the healthiest seeds to a new spot. And over time, we will select for resistance against these diseases. If we stop planting them, you're really slowing that process down.
To protect the development of young oaks, does it help to get soil from underneath a mature oak that has a mycorrhizal network and like transplant it as well to the base of the young oak?
Do you need to inoculate your soil when you plant a new oak? There are people in this room sitting over there who would say, that's a great idea, I think. And I actually did that. Most of where I planted my oaks, it was subsoil. You know, there wasn't very much topsoil to begin with. I'm very close to serpentine barrens, so pretty sure it's not what many of the oaks really wanted. So I went under, so they were white oaks. I went under an existing white oak. I didn't get a lot of soil. Again, a handful really of oak leaf litter, and I just put it there. Who knows if that worked, but my oaks are all happy. It's so easy because they will spread themselves. I will point out an experiment I tried to do in a greenhouse back in the 80s, a long time ago. And it had something to do with mycorrhizae. I can't remember the question I was asking, but I wanted to have pots that had mycorrhizae in it and pots that didn't have them in this greenhouse. And a guy from the plant science department said, well, how are you going to keep the mycorrhizae out of the pots, out of your control pots? And I said, well, I won't put it in. And he said, well, they're floating in the air. The spores are floating in the air, and it will not inoculate itself. Is that true? I don't. They said, I gave up on that experiment. But anyway, it's probably a good idea. It will speed it up. Yes. How can you advocate with your neighbors about what I shared with you tonight? I'll tell you what doesn't work. If you go up to your neighbor and knock on the door and say, "You're not living right, I want you to live like me," probably won't work. I think the best way is to be a good example. If they're worried about, if we're talking about native plant landscaping, people worry it's messy, it's going to reduce the property value, it's going to make me look like a low-class citizen, and all of my neighbors will hate me. You have to prove that none of those things are true. You have to make a landscape that's prettier than theirs. And you know what? When you do that, they walk by and they look and they're interested. It really does catch on. I can show you pictures of lots of really beautiful landscapes, 100% native. Nobody knows that. They don't know native from not. They do know pretty from unpretty. I can also show you a 100% non-native landscape that is not being taken care of. And it looks like a mess. So it's the maintenance that is going to determine whether or not it's an acceptable landscape in your neighborhood. I do talk a lot about reducing the lawn. We got 44 million acres of lawn in this country, which is an area bigger than New England. But I don't say get rid of lawn. It's a great cue for care. The lawn you keep should be mowed. It's never going to be the center of your biodiversity, but it's a great place to walk. And it lines your flower beds, it lines your sidewalks and your driveways, and it shows that you understand what the culture is. And that's good enough. That is good enough for your neighbors. Yes.
Dr. Tallamy, I've had the privilege of hearing you speak in Virginia several times. And I'm curious about a related question to the spongy moth. What's the current status of emerald ash borer in this country?
What is the current status of emerald ash borer in this country? It's actually looking up. The emerald ash borer, of course, is a beetle, metallic wood boring beetle that was brought in around Michigan not that long ago, spread like wildfire, killed ashes. You know, for a while there, they tried to get ahead of it and cut down all the ashes before the ash borer got there. That didn't work. Most of our ashes are highly susceptible to the emerald ash borer. There are a few pockets, and one of them is in Michigan itself, where the ashes did not die. But there has been a big USDA effort to bring in parasitoids of the eggs and the larvae of the emerald ash borer. There are at least 4 that have been introduced. At least 3 of them are starting to work. There was a county in New Jersey last year, I think it was, that had 70% control. So the introduction of emerald ash borer specific parasitoids is making the picture a little bit more rosy. Most of our big ashes, a lot of them are already gone. Many of them will go, but we got little guys coming up. And the ash borer can't hit the little guys until they get bigger. They're not fat enough. And in the meantime, these parasitoids are becoming established. So don't give up on your ashes. It's another thing I hear, never plant an ash. Plant more than ever. You know, maybe it will die, but that's okay. We're looking for resistance here. Maybe, 0.5% of those ashes are resistant, and we need to find them and not cut them down ahead of time. Yes.
Tree to transplant it and have a reasonable chance of it surviving.
Is there an optimal height for an ash tree to transplant? Or oak tree? Okay. Very different answer. Yeah. You want to, if you can, you want to transplant it as small as possible. And if you can, start with an acorn in a flower pot. I don't recommend putting it out anymore because I have learned the rodent population it'll never make it, but get it going for one summer in your pot and then put it out that fall. Because you don't want the roots to ever hit the edge and start getting root bound. If you have one in your flower bed, do it. If you have to cut off some of the roots, it'll slow it down, but it's still, when it's small, it'll recover quickly. When you buy a 15-foot oak for $2,000, it has a 50% chance of dying. So it's been either balled in burlap where the roots have been cut off and then it spends 10 years trying to grow them again, or it's been grown in an air pot where it's not root bound, but it's a very small root mass compared to the size of the tree that it has to support. If I plant an acorn the same day I plant one of those trees, in 10 years, my acorn will be bigger and healthier than that tree. And I've actually done that, so I can say that. Yes.
Landscaping, is there an organization collected sample regulations landscaping while still in mind what part of the field?
Are there municipalities who have essentially changed their regulations to promote this? Is that what you're asking? I think what you're asking is, are regulations changing so that we can actually create these landscapes? And in several places they are. I've got a couple of regulations on my computer that people have sent me and have been accepted. The state of Illinois has recently passed a rule that says HOAs cannot keep you from planting native plants. Florida, I think, did the same thing. It is really starting to change. Can I venture a guess how old oak trees that are 5 feet across are? No, I can't. Because it depends on, first of all, they grow faster than you think. So that oak I just showed you today, it's 23 years old. No, it's 24 years old now. And it's like this, 24 years old. So it's not hundreds of years old. If it's in really good conditions, it'll grow fast and get big quickly. But if it's over sand or something and poor conditions, it'll grow much slower. So it could be much older than it looks. You want me to stop, don't you?
More question and then
Right.
I'll.
Yes.
Dr. Belk bragged about how all the oaks growing her property were grown from beer cans.
Okay, you could try that.
A beer can, and she planted them, and a lot of great oaks.
Dr. Belk started her acorns in beer cans and it worked really well. So you can try that. Okay. Right now.